Hi there, Mrs. Nichols here. Today we're going to go through a tutorial on how to use pi on your calculator. Okay, so you'll need a calculator when we're working with pi for the most part. You could use a physical calculator, a cell phone calculator, or if you want an online calculator, my recommendation is the Desmos Scientific Calculator. All right. We've learned a little bit about pi. It's the relationship between the circumference and diameter of a circle. The thing about pi is when you calculate pi, it goes on forever. It's what we call an irrational number. So it doesn't show a pattern and it goes on forever. So when we approximate it, there's no easy way to do it. We can round to 3.14 or use a fraction, 22/7, that's pretty close to it. But realistically, it's got more digits. It's got an infinite number of digits, right? More than your calculator will show you. So we have a couple ways of dealing with this. When we give an answer that has pi in it, we can leave it in terms of pi, which means we leave the pi symbol there. We can use the pi button on our calculator to approximate, or we can round and use 3.14 to approximate pi. How do I use pi on my calculator? So you just have to be able to find pi. There are lots of physical calculators. This is a really common one that we see at the 7th grade level. The pi button is right there. You can also find it on an online or a cell phone calculator. If you don't see it when you hold your calculator up and down, try rotating it. On the iPhone, it's right in between tan H and rand on the very bottom row. You'll see the pi button. It's got lots of digits that show up when I type it in. If you have another calculator, start by rotating it, see if you can find it. And if you can't, please feel free to come ask me and I'm happy to help you find it on your phone. The other way that we can find pi is on a calculator is by using an online calculator. There are lots of these, but again, my preference is the Desmos Scientific Calculator. So here's our Desmos calculator. The pi button happens to be right here, so I can press it in, and there's pi. So I'll be able to use all three of these calculators to make calculations using the number pi. If I approximate 3 pi, I can figure out that number in many different ways. One of the ways is to just leave that answer in terms of pi. When I do that, I just write 3 pi as my answer, and I'm done. Another way that I could do that would be to use my pi button. For this example, I'll use my calculator. So I'll take 3, and you should just be able to hit 3 pi, which I know it doesn't show up very well, but what I see on my calculator is 9.424779761. And if you notice in the description here, it's going to go on and on forever. So you'll want to round that, maybe to 2 decimal places. So maybe you'll actually just say 9.42. Another way I can do this is to use 3.14. So just like when we have variables, even though pi is a number and not a variable, when I have 3 pi, there's no symbol written in between it. It does mean 3 times pi. So, if you take your calculator and you take 3 times pi, you'll end up with the same answer as you just saw, right? So if we're approximating by rounding before we multiply, we'll take 3 times 3.14, and this gives us an answer that's already rounded. So notice it gives us 9.42, which is what we decided to round this to anyway. So sometimes 3.14 is helpful to round to, but other times you might need more digits, and we'll talk about when and why as we move on. If I'm approximating 4 pi, in terms of pi, I'll leave my answer as 4 pi. That's it, I'm done. If I use my calculator, I do actually need to type in the multiplication symbol between the 4 and the pi. So I'll type in 4 times pi equals 12.566. So do you see how many digits are there? Round appropriately, all right? My rule of thumb is usually 2 digits after the decimal. And if I have a strong preference beyond that, I'll let you know. So this one came out to be 12.56637 and so on. So 2 digits after the decimal tells me that I'm going to be rounding to this spot, but the second 6 tells me to round up. The last way that I could calculate this would be to round to 3.14 before I calculate. So in that case, what I would do is I would take 4 times 3.14, and that just gives me 12.56. So note that depending on when I rounded, I got different values here. So once again, if I want to give an exact answer, I'll just write 7.5 pi, and that's it. That's as precise as I could be. Another way that I could do this is to use the pi button. This time I'll show you using Desmos, an online calculator. So I can type in 7.5 pi. And that gives me this value, 23.5619, right? And it goes on from there. But remember what I said before, we're going to round usually to 2 decimal places or whatever you're told in the problem. So I'll round this to 23.56. If I use 3.14 instead of the pi button, I'm going to get something that's rounded a little less accurately. So once again, I'll use 7.5 times 3.14, and this just rounds it for me ahead of time. Note, the hundredths digit is a little off, right? The more we round early on, the further we are off from the exact answer, but this is still a very good estimate. So 23.55. Please feel free to email me or stop by my office hours if you have any more questions about using pi on your calculator.